So I want to get some other perspectives from the audience on this one. Carlos, I think you had a couple of thoughts on this, on Mexico?
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to put an example of health services portability, for example. In Mexico, we have a big challenge providing health services for our larger population, mostly for the underprivileged population. And, you know, enabling a strong communications network, broadband, of course, will, and with the provision of electronic health records, we will be able to have people accepting or taking health services from any entity that is closer to home or that has the specialty it needs. Today, or nowadays, people is being served by 3 or 4 different health services networks in Mexico, and you have to go specifically to that health services network because they are the ones that have your records. If we enable a larger, a stronger communications network, if we make these entities communicate their own applications on the health electronic health records, then people will be able to take services from the closest and the most specialized hospital or clinic, which is a huge impact to the overall and most underprivileged population. So in Mexico, we have the plans to do that. We have challenges from infrastructure and from standards and all of that, but there are excellent examples of that happening. For example, in Spain, that health services portability is a reality and has improved the quality of life of the Spanish population significantly.
Excellent. So let me go to other members here. So Minister Ivanovski, you're at 66%, you said, penetration in Macedonia. That means moved up dramatically, but there's still people there that are in rural, they're underserved, they may live in farming communities. And I know you've looked very carefully. How do I reach those people? Maybe talk a little bit about your aspirations there and your plans about how you get to those underserved.
Yes, thank you, John. We looked at all the business model. Bob mentioned public-private partnership of how you can reach every citizen in the country to have a broadband connectivity. But in reality, for some areas, the return on investment is just not there. So governments have to step up in order to provide every citizen equal opportunity to be online, to be part of the digital world. So we did analysis and we located 680 villages in Macedonia where there was a still school. There are many more villages, but we focused on areas where there is a young population. We put a Wi-Fi kiosk in the village courtyard or in the school, near the school, sometime on the wall of the outside of the school where there's electricity. And on the Wi-Fi kiosk there is a monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, and a Wi-Fi antenna. We did this in a procurement that the Ministry of Information Society ran on a period of 4 years, where in that village, whoever wins the bid, he is obligated for 4 years to provide free internet to anybody that wants to connect to it. And after 4 years, the equipment belongs to the operator. We did this in a way to stimulate him to bring the network. He cannot put a Wi-Fi kiosk if he doesn't build a network. And on the other hand, in these areas, the majority of the population is dealing with farming, the farmers, and we as a government are very much supporting the farmers. We're subsidizing heavily so they can live a normal and good productive life, because agriculture is a strong part of the economy of Macedonia. So most of them were able to afford to buy a laptop, a smartphone, internet connectivity, but the network just wasn't there. There was no point. And what was happening, the young people, they finished school, they were migrating towards the urban areas, even families were migrating to urban areas. The internet is a big part of the life of everybody today, especially the young population. So in these 680 villages, we asked the World Bank to do a study, and they finalized it a few months ago. And they showed that at the beginning, where there was no internet service providers, right now only 153 villages are left on the internet service provider that we, in a way, subsidize. So the rest of the 507 villages have 2 or more internet service providers, meaning that the demand was there. People were buying laptops, people were buying smartphones, they were buying internet packages. And for us, the success is just that indicator, that internet service providers are building more and more network. And in continuing with this project, we will focus more now on content, because local content is very much what Carlos was talking about, a prerequisite in a way for the broadband connectivity. It's the chicken or the egg. Do you want the internet first or the content first? Where do you focus? On e-services, where the citizens from the rural area, they don't have to go to the nearest municipality to get basic birth certificates and other taxes and other personal documentations, and many of them, we have them installed. But it is important that you give an opportunity, equal opportunity to every citizen in the country. And we believe that with the Wi-Fi project, we have an example that we can share, and it was shared in the report of the Broadband Commission for Digital Development as a good case of how you can work with the private sector, support them to develop infrastructure, and then years later, you see the success of that project.
You have an example? This is excellent. I heard these examples actually in the plans for Mexico about, you know, using the public facilities as a antenna for this. I mean, Carlos was going to say that. I saw it in the plans for Costa Rica, so that was a really good one as well. Do you have any best practices you see in Latin America, one that would really target the underserved, that stick in your mind as, wow, I'd love to share this with the audience?
Yes, we have to think how we can extend the benefits of broadband to the entire population, and in that sense, affordability is a key issue in our countries. While the prices of broadband have gone downwards in the last few years, they may still be seen in some cases as a bottleneck for the people in the base of the pyramid to getting access to services in some developing countries. In that sense, I want to state that competition is a key issue and is widely recognized as the most effective mechanism to contribute to lower prices, and that should be the way we follow this through policy. At the same time, in Latin America, we have an issue with taxes in some countries. In some countries, taxation levels are high. We have taxes, luxury taxes in some countries for ICT, and that is the contrary of what we are trying to say today, that is that ICT must be extended to everyone and not to high-class people. Also, custom taxes or custom quotas in some countries operate as a barrier for the import of smartphones, for instance, so that is an issue to attend. But a key issue here for affordability is that we need flexibility to develop new business models and to be able to provide new commercial plans that will help us to connect those unconnected people. We need creativity in that sense. And the prepaid mobile data, as John said, is a possible channel and a possible way forward in this sense. We believe that mobile technology in general, mobile broadband, has the potential to tackle the affordability barrier at the base of the pyramid. We just have to remember what happened with the voice services in Latin America and in other regions. We were able to universalize the voice services through the mobile technology, especially through prepaid programs in Latin America. So we may be able to replicate that experience in the case of broadband. We believe that mobile broadband can provide affordable services for households to connect to broadband through several ways. On the one hand, through reduced prices thanks to competition. In Latin America, according to GSMA, we have seen in the last 3 years an important decrease in the prices of broadband, mobile broadband, 7.3% for dongles and more than 50% for the case of smartphones. That has increased considerably the affordability in the region. The second issue is price flexibility, what I have talked recently. Flexibility that may allow us to allow consumers to purchase the services based on what they can afford, mainly on a daily basis, mainly on a specific volume cap, or so on. So we need creativity to be able to develop plans to reach that population. At the same time, mobile technology may help us to remove some barriers. For instance, the cost of purchasing a laptop. It is much cheaper, and it will become even cheaper, as we talked today, to access a smartphone, for instance. We have seen that in Latin America, in some countries, that for whatever reason, maybe geography or demography issues, the fixed broadband is relatively expensive, but on the other hand, mobile broadband can be really cheap, and that can be the way to close the digital divide. Bolivia is an example on that. So to sum up this space, we believe flexibility is essential, flexibility for the investment needed, but also for creating commercial offers specific to those segments. And there is another issue that it is key for mobile sector that Dr. Pepper said today, that is spectrum, but I will leave it for another intervention.
Okay. I'm going to move to the section on the best practices and demand creation. I think we started touching that. I want to make just maybe one comment on a best practice fairly locally here on demand creation. Then I'm going to go to the audience for a time's sake. Looking at a country not so far from Mexico, Colombia, I think they've done a tremendous job, and I think the minister was here earlier this week to speak with you, done a tremendous job of the best practices on demand creation, and it's very much like the programs Minister Ivanovski talks about. And if you look inside Colombia, I've tracked them very carefully, been there many times, looked at the programs, been all over the rural. They took the 16 or 17% VAT off all IT equipment several years ago. The market surged on that. We can see the numbers because a lot of it's our equipment. I saw numbers that were way above Latin America growth numbers when that came off. The Chamber of Commerce in Colombia then did the study and said, oh, because there was so much more equipment here, creating so much more business, their tax revenue actually went up because of the downstream taxes. And there's a very nice study that's been done by Colombia Chamber of Commerce on that. But what's happened there is it's been a more comprehensive program with uses and applications, but they've done 2 or 3 different areas that might be worth thinking about. The salary scales in Latin America, I think you call them A, B, C, D, E, where D and E are the people that struggle to own the equipment. They're in the much lower income levels. What the minister's done there is focused on, as he's received funds from the 4G license fee, not taking it in money, but taking it in tablets and cost of service for the lower income Class D Colombians, which have about 5% penetration of internet usage. And what that's done is it translates the spectrum fee and the service costs into about 1.2 million tablets. Goes right into that Class D Colombians, and it will take a 5% penetration and take that up to into the 30 or so percent or more. That would take a flow down of business models many, many years to get the incomes up and the prices down to afford that. So a massive program there. It also takes the USF, and if the regions invest in education from their mining royalties and other areas that the regions get, they invest in this IT, it'll actually match it from the Universal Service Fund. So if they put skin in the game, the regions, they get matched. So if the school buys 500 devices or computers, they get matched from the central government. So there's a number of programs there on best practices. I've seen a lot of these around the globe, cooperation between private and government areas, where you can take a 5% penetration of laptops into universities in Senegal, and in 1 year make it 50%. With taxes, with loan guarantees from World Bank, which could be IDB, BID, I guess you call it in Latin America, programs on import duties, lower cost devices, prepaid broadband, and when you put it all together, you can actually divide some of these costs by 2 and 3. And I can share many of those examples with you, and some of them are in the Broadband Commission report. But I think what I'd like to do here, though, is we only have a few minutes left. I want to go to the audience and get some of your questions. I really want questions here, and if you can identify yourself and direct those to whoever on the panel you think you'd like to take those to, that will be great. There are a couple of mics here, so I can't see too far in the audience, but just identify yourself and the mic will come to you. Anyone going to break the ice there? Anyone? Okay. While you're thinking about your question, let me go back to the panel then. Best practices that you've seen drive growth in internet usage. Anyone want to take that one? I think you had a thought on this, Carlos. I think you, maybe Minister Ivanovski, on that, in terms of best practices you've seen that have driven that penetration. I have several examples, but I'd like to...
Yeah, I would like just to elaborate on what you mentioned, and Minister Ivanovski shared the strategy to make affordability and coverage for the underprivileged in his country. In Mexico, you know, what we are doing is we have a major challenge because of the size of our territory. So everybody wants to have a cell tower in Guadalajara city or close to the Estadio Azteca, right? Because there's tons of data flowing there. But what about the small towns all over the country? So the decision, very intrepid decision, I would say, that the government has made is there's thousands of public buildings around the country, both federal, state, and local buildings, and the decision has been made that each and every public building in the country will have an access point providing free Wi-Fi services for the local population. Now, there's other challenges. You have to have an access device to do that, but I think that is a very, very aggressive plan, which eventually will create this additional demand because the people will have a means to access the internet very easily in his or her own town.
So this is Macedonia's doing it, Mexico's doing it, Costa Rica told me about it last week, clearly there. I think we've got one question from the audience over there, so maybe you could... Is your mic live?
Mic is not on.
Yeah, now it's working.
Now I think it's working. Can you hear me? No.
Go ahead. It's working.
Yes, my name is Manu Nipani. I serve with UNESCO. UNESCO is part of Broadband Commission.
Yep.
For the last 2 years, I think there has been lots of talks to talk. You know, you've been meeting almost 3 months, you know, from one exotic location to the other one. But I think, you know, Broadband Commission hasn't really delivered to solve various problems of the world. You know, I'm basically talking about, you know, this year's report, you know, essentially contains something about how broadband can improve education in all possible sense. But I would like to see that, you know, how some of these thinking will convert into reality and the projects will be implemented to uplift lives and livelihood of the people.
Your question's about...
The question is about, you know, it's linked to Broadband Commission. You know, I heard a lot about that.
Yeah, so is it reaching the lower incomes for education and healthcare and the Millennium Development Goals?
What I'm saying is that there has been lots of talks to talk and not talk to walk. And what is, because, you know, see, world's, you know, second richest man sits in that. All CEOs, you know, sit there. Head of UN agencies sit there.
Yep.
But everyone is talking, but the real deliverable has people haven't seen. So last 2 years, you know, utility of Broadband Commission, I'm questioning that.
Okay. So this is a question about the effectivity of the Broadband Commission and the difference it's made.
I have no idea what he said.
Okay, I'm going to let 3 people on here each make a comment on that one. I think is the right thing to do. I sit there and I know it's made a difference in some of the actions I've taken. Gives you the confidence to do that. But Minister, you want us to have a couple of words? You sit on the Broadband Commission. You've been to all of them.
Yes. Well, I can tell you it's been very, very beneficial for Macedonia because the experience for the people who are in the Broadband Commission they have shared has been beneficial for me personally to come up with legislation, with projects, with policies that can support the Macedonian citizens, where we can grow the telecom sector. And I believe your question was more towards the mandate of the Broadband Commission. It's not just, as I understood your question, is why they're not going out and doing project versus doing the reports. but I can share that there are multiple task forces on environment, on education, on sciences, on digital sustainability, that these people have worked to put the report together and serve as example. But I think as far as the mandate of the Broadband Commission, the question should go to the ITU and UNESCO better. Maybe it was,
Couple of
that's
words
what
on
I
that.
understood.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I couldn't hear any of the questions, so I'll just pick up and assume from what John and the minister said what I think the question might be. But in terms of the mandate, the Broadband Commission is, it is it is one of the leanest organizations I've ever seen. There is no permanent staff. The Secretariat is on loan from both UNESCO and the ITU. It doesn't have a large budget, so it's not about intervening or having projects itself. But the impact, I think, has been huge. If you take a look at, because of the recommendations of the Commission, the number of countries that added and focused and added broadband plans and strategies as a result of the Commission's recommendations has been measurable and quite dramatic. If you look at the recommendations that have come from the Commission, it's had direct impact in the engagements that I've had over the last 4 and 5 years, working with governments globally based upon the recommendations of the Commission. Those recommendations are being integrated into national plans. The focus of the Commission in terms of its mandate was really on the Millennium Development Goals and how to connect. Is there a connection between broadband and ICT and the Millennium Development Goals? And the answer is yes, at least 7 out of the 8. And then what is the direct impact, and how can broadband improve achieving the Millennium Development Goals, specifically by connecting the unconnected? And I think that there's measurable evidence that there has been impact.
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple of areas I think are relevant, because it's very much like when, with Sergio and Poisson brings all of the experts together. What you'll find from people around the world, they'll share best practices, and it makes a difference. And I think that's one of the big focuses there. Working groups. Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia talks about using mobile phones and SMS aimed at TB and diabetes in Africa. That's a focus. We spend a lot of time on education. I was just in UN Week and announced using ICT in farmers or people that work in rice paddies in Cambodia, using it for soil tests and go to market. 80% of the people in Cambodia work at subsistence level in rice fields. And the use of ICT, where one person has some tablet and maybe 200 Cambodians bring their soil test there and they do that, makes a massive, massive difference that UN cares about food security. I know UNESCO does, USAID, and all of those areas. I hope we get in the spirit of that question, but the education, the healthcare, the food security, all of the poverty, all those things that the 8 Millennium Development Goals is why I think forums like this make an amazing difference. And forums like Broadband Commission make a really big difference.
Yeah, John, and I think there's
one more question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think there's one other one of the working groups that you've not mentioned, which has been very important, which is the working group on gender and broadband and ICT. And now, as a result of that, with targets for gender equality and bringing more women into the workforce in the ICT sector, and looking at STEM and STEM education, there was a meeting last week of the working group before the latest Broadband Commission meeting. UN Women are involved, and the other organizations with targeting bringing in more young girls and women into the ICT, the engineering, and the STEM sector. And this is having a real impact.
Okay. So we're a little bit over time. I can take one question there, and I'm going to ask for one statement from each audience. So let me take that one, and I'm going to get one person to answer that, okay?
The sir has a question. His name is Eduardo Ruelas from the Latin America University, and his question is, who would manage the broadband in Mexico? Given that sometimes the government takes advantage of things such as fixed IPs? they take advantage of very high prices. So the sir would like to know who would manage that in a country, for example, like Mexico.
Who would manage the networks there? You want to take that one on Carlos or Juan?
I can make a comment. This is a market, and the prices are driven by the market. The government regulates, of course, enables, and those public policies for the broadband enablement to be attractive for businesses, but it is a business. So government does not fix prices, and we don't want government fixing prices. We want government regulating and making easy to do business and making attractive to do business, even in a small town. So it's not that we need somebody to put the price. I don't know.
Okay, so I think we're a little bit over time at this point. I want to go to the audience, to the panel, and each of you, one quick statement or recommendation for the audience. Recognize there's the audience there. There's the audience actually watching us on a webcast, and there's the audience that's going to see this when it's you know, done and put on the web. So each of you, one quick comment. Start with you, Bob. Recommendation for the audience.
Recommendation, we've heard this Monday, yesterday, and again today on this session. You need to focus on both supply and demand. They go hand in hand. One without the other is not going to move the needle and increase adoption and usage. We need to move from deployment to adoption to usage, and it's usage that gets the benefits. So you need a balance of supply and demand, and be pragmatic.
Okay. Minister Ivanovski.
Well, from aspect of the policy standpoint, I can just share that sometimes the balance that Dr. Pepper is talking about, you have to keep in mind in order to have a healthy sector, healthy economy, and in order to provide the citizens the fair treatment, the fair price packages based on the power purchasing poverty of the country, the decisions the government have to make sometimes is to lower the fees of the spectrum in order to have more competition. That is what Macedonia has done, and we have put in our strategy for the next 3 years that we will have a gliding path where we'll continue lowering the fees of the spectrum, so the telecom sector will continue investing in more broadband, investing in CapEx in order to stimulate innovations, to stimulate more content, to stimulate more jobs, and hopefully that will stimulate a better economy.
One recommendation.
Okay. My reflection will go mainly for emerging country regulators and policymakers. We need to understand that the ones that we are here in this room, for instance, we are a selected group of people that have access to technology, but sadly that is not the case for everybody in our countries. So our highest priority should be to facilitate the objective of closing the digital divide, to connect the unconnected. It is key to create the conditions for the investment to happen, as we said, but also we have to avoid focusing specifically the regulation on those that have already been connected. Instead of that, we believe that the focus should be on those that are not yet connected. I'm thinking, for instance, regulation on quality, regulation on full internet plans, that we have seen some attempts in some countries. That may help those that are already connected, but that may be a barrier for those that has not yet been connected. The focus should be on this last group of people.
Not connected. Carlos, one recommendation.
Thank you. And being the last one to say that, I just want to take the time to thank the audience for being this early in the morning after a fantastic show last night. And of course, thanking my fellow panelists, Minister Ivanovski, Robert, Juan, certainly John. Thank you for inviting us. It was a privilege and an honor to share this panel with you. And one thing, the main challenges are, of course, coverage, affordability. We discussed this, both services as well as access devices. But also, and I'm gonna take something that Mr. Miguel Porrua said from the Inter-American Development Bank, mentioned it yesterday. We need to have availability and affordability, but also enablement. And enablement means, and you were saying this, Robert, training the general population on how to use and leverage these new technologies. It's not only having the services, but we have to enable. We have heard some very interesting and compelling facts. In Nigeria, ICT is 10% of the GDP, which is enormous. Yesterday, I heard the Minister of Economy of Quebec, of the province of Quebec, ICT is 5% of a very large GDP as well there. And in Mexico, and this is my last comment, we have done the homework. We have Mrs. Alejandra Lagunes, the coordinator of our digital agenda. We have, at the local level, at the state level, we have the first Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology, and up to date, the only Minister of Technology in the country. So we need to push for more of that, to have the ICT as part of the agenda. And we have the leaders in place. Let's get the things done.
So ICT part of the agenda. I'll have the last word just on one recommendation from myself, and that's the, there's a lot of the audience out there. Many of you have friends. I think we've had a great panel here. I'd like to encourage each of you to share what's coming out of WCIT. Bring your friends in, get them to see this. It'll all be webcast and shown, because the more people that get these best practices, I think the better it is for anyone, because you've had a very rich panel here. I'd invite you to do that. The second thing I'd invite you to do is there's some tremendous reports that contain a lot of the data we talk about, the financing of networks, the balance between investment, government policies and investment in networks, investment of end demand, and the state of broadband. A lot of really good ITU reports. They was all published last week for the UN, several of them. Take a look at them. Take a look at some of this rich data you're getting here from WITSA. Share it with as many people as possible, because I think it's the sharing of the best practices across all the private, public, NGOs, multilateral sections that's going to make a difference for everyone. Panel, thanks for a great interaction.
Thank you,
Audience, thank you. WITSA, thanks for having us here.
Thanks to the